Hi everyone, my name is Cathy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the young adult librarian at Library 21C. You might note that our summer adventure theme this year is Tales, T-A-I-L-S, and Tales, T-A-L-E-S. To tie into that second spelling of Tales, today I'm going to teach you how to play the game GLOOM. In GLOOM, you and the other players are all controlling a family, and you play cards on your family members as well as other players' family members to affect different events in their lives. And those events will have either positive or negative effects on the character's happiness. At the end of the game, you want your characters to have suffered the most before their deaths. So you want to have the least number of points at the end of the game to be the winner in GLOOM. And as you go along playing these cards onto characters, you'll make a little story of how this event ties into all of the other things that have happened to them over their lives so far. Let's take a look. To start off your game of GLOOM, every player will choose a family and take the character cards for that family. So you can see here all of the character cards. The different families each have a different color background behind their portraits, as well as a little symbol below the portraits here. So all of the character cards that have the red background on their portraits also have this little picture of a brain below them. At the top of the card, it gives you the character's name and a little descriptor. So this is Professor Helena Slogar, and she is an eccentric inventor. Then at the bottom of the card, we have what we just call flavor text. So it doesn't make a difference to the game. It's not a special ability or anything like that. It just gives you a little bit of information about the character. So Professor Helena Slogar's flavor text here says, Helena enjoys gardening, long walks in the moonlight, and reanimating the dead. Now this game plays 2 to 5 players, and as you can see there are only 4 families. The instructions say that if you're playing with 4 players, you should take all 5 cards for the family you've chosen, and then choose one of those to discard, just so the game doesn't take too long. If you're playing with 5 players, everyone will do that. So 4 players will each choose a family and put aside 1 character to discard, and then the 5th player will get all of those discards. So the 5th player in that case would get 1 character from each of the families. We'll set up a game for 2 players here. So I'll take the green family and the purple family. And then the orange and red families, which we aren't using, can go back in the box. There are 2 of these reference cards, so if you have more than 2 players, obviously you can space these out around the table, however makes sense. And then we'll take the rest of the deck here and just shuffle them all together. After your deck is shuffled, every player gets a starting hand of 5 cards. Let's take a look at the different kinds of cards. So the majority of the cards in the game are these modifier cards. They have black text at the bottom. They will always have self-worth points, which can be positive or negative along the left side here. They may also have little story icons on the right, which can tie into special abilities on the bottom. If you see an arrow like this one, that means this effect happens immediately. So as soon as you play this card, Was Delighted by Ducklings, you draw 1 card for each one of these little duck story icons that you can see in play on any of your family members. There are also some cards that have this little icon with the arrow going backwards in a circle, and that is a continuous effect. So as soon as you play the card, that starts happening, and it remains in effect as long as the text on that card is visible. So this one says your draw limit is increased by 1 card. So as long as you can see that, that means there's not a card laying on top of it, then your draw limit is increased by 1 card. There are also some event cards. They have a gray text box on the bottom and this red symbol in the middle here. Once you play one of these, whatever it says happens and it goes straight into the discard. So this isn't played on top of a character card as the modifier cards will be. And this one has on it the response icon, so this little loop-a-doop arrow that says cancel and discard an event card as soon as it's played. So you can play this in response to someone else playing an event card, whereas all the other cards you'd be playing them on your turn as an action. And then our final kind of card here is the Untimely Death card. It has this image of, I'm going to guess, a crow on a skull, and it has a description of how the character died. This one says, was slain by an heir. A lot of them have another effect on the bottom here as well. This one says that it's worth an additional -10 points if also on that character there is a money or heart icon. The first player in your game of Gloom will be whoever had the worst day. If everyone has had an equally miserable day, whoever owns the game or checked it out from the library gets to go first. On your turn, you get to make 2 plays and then draw back up to your hand limit. One of your plays could be playing a modifier card. Now these you can place either onto your own family's cards or onto an opponent's cards, because this one has a positive self-worth score along the left-hand side here. And remember, you want to have the least number of points at the end of the game. You'd probably want to place this one onto an opponent's card. So we'll put this onto Butterfield, the lurking butler over here. And this card is Found Love on the Lake. So it could be that Butterfield was out along the lake doing some of his butlery duties and found a mysterious stranger there, and they've fallen in love. So this also has the effect that your draw limit is increased by 1 card, and that applies to this player, whoever is running the purple family here, not to the person who played the card. So that's sort of the drawback, is this character does now have a positive self-worth, but you have also given that player additional cards in their hand each turn. Along with playing modifiers, you could play an event card, and that you would play and put right in the discard. You could also play an Untimely Death card. Now there's a couple caveats with the Untimely Death card. Remember, you get to play 2 plays during your turn. If you're playing an Untimely Death, it has to be the first of the 2 plays on your turn. So you can't try to give somebody a couple extra negative points and then kill them off. It has to be the first play. And it can only be played on a character with a negative self-worth. So I could not play an Untimely Death card on Butterfield since he now has a positive 15 self-worth. You also have the option for one of your plays to discard your entire hand, or you can pass, and you can pass either one or both of the plays for your turn if you so choose. So after you've made 2 plays, or fewer if you so wish, you draw back up to 5 cards from the deck, or more if you have something like this card, which increases your draw limit. It's also worth noting that you don't have a hand limit, so if you, through the course of your turn, somehow have gained more than 5 cards, at the end of your turn you don't have to discard any of them. You just don't draw any more. So let's look at what could be a couple of turns of the game here. So let's say the green player is going first. I could take one of my cards, one of my modifiers, Stole from a Stiff. worth a negative 15 self-worth points and play that on Angel, our starry-eyed serial killer. So she's done her first bit of murdering, and while she was at it, she took a little something from their pockets. And then I have a second play for my turn. I can play another modifier card, was taunted by tigers, and that's worth negative 20 and also negative 10 points. You know, she went to the zoo this weekend, and the tigers tried to get at her. It was scarring. She had a bad time. So she's feeling pretty badly about herself here. So since you can see all three of these icons, even though the negative 15 is one card down, that all adds up to her total self-worth right now of negative 45 points. It also has the effect that this player has to skip their draw phase for this turn. Then the purple player here may say, negative 45 points seems like a lot. Maybe we can do something to increase Angel's self-worth a little bit. Now, the purple player doesn't have any cards with positive self-worth in their hand, but they do have this one here, was perturbed by the pudding. So they can play that on top of was taunted by tigers, and that turns what used to be a negative 20 and a negative 10 both into negative 5s. So that's a little bit better of a case for the purple player here if they're just against a negative 25 instead of a negative 45. So yeah, Angel was at the zoo. The tigers tried to get at her. It was very scarring. And then she went to the zoo restaurant, and the pudding there was just disgusting. And although the tiger thing was pretty bad, the pudding thing sort of distracted it from her. She has a bad taste in her mouth still, but it sort of made her forget all the problems with the tigers. And then this purple player may use their second play of the turn on Goody Czar, the nefarious nanny here. And she was scarred by scandals. So some stories came out about her previous nanny positions, and she wasn't exactly Mary Poppins. So her reputation has gone down the toilet. Her self-worth is now negative 25, which ties her up with Angel here as well. And the player now has to discard their entire hand. But they get to draw back up to 5. So that's how the game can go back and forth a little here. Obviously, you'd want to play things on all of the characters that you have in play here, but it's a little back and forth of trying to decrease the self-worth of your own characters and increase the self-worth of your opponent's characters so that they don't wind up with negative 45 points when they die. So that's how you play Gloom. It's pretty easy, a lot of back and forth of trying to inflict terrible, terrible events on your own family members while trying to cheer up the family members of the other players. The game ends when all of the characters in one family are dead, and then you look at the self-worth points that are visible on only all of the dead characters, add them all together, and then whoever has the lowest total score from all of their dead characters is the winner. So for this here, this character would be worth negative 40 points because they are dead, and those are the visible points here. So it doesn't matter about any of the other things that you can't see anymore because they're covered up. And it's just very silly to see all of the stories that you can get into, especially with how weird the characters are to start off with. Like, this is Grogar. He's a work in progress. And it says, Professor Slogar is determined to create the perfect groom for her daughter. She still has a ways to go. Like, he's a bear with just a brain in there. So some of the games can be like, all right, so Grogar was walking around outside as best as he can, being a teddy bear with a brain, and he was pursued by poodles. They saw something moving. They thought he was a toy. Kind of is. Understandable. And he was just absolutely mauled. And while he was outside, he was wounded by wasps. The wasps saw something's up, and they got at him too. But another character might say, well, you know what? Other people heard about Grogar's escapades, and while he was at a feast, they asked him to regale them with the stories of all of his adventures with dogs and wasps. But then, if this is my character, I might say, well, he was put into prison. While he was telling the stories, he got into fights with some of the people there. You know, he's a bear with a brain. A lot of people were making fun of him, and he wound up in prison. But then another character might say, but while he was in prison, he met someone, and he was married magnificently. Things are looking pretty good for Grogar now. And I could say, well, that may be. But while they were on their honeymoon, they had a horrible holiday. And his new spouse is no more. And he is distraught and heartbroken. And while wandering his home, he was tragically and ironically eaten by bears and is now deceased. So it's just ridiculous. So if you're interested in checking this game out, now that you know how to play it, this copy, which is the regular standard version of GLOOM, is available for checkout at Library 21C. And there are a couple versions at the Penrose Library as well. They have GLOOM in Space and Munchkin GLOOM, which is based on the Munchkin game, which you might also be familiar with. You can check out 2 board games at a time for up to a week. So I hope you enjoyed learning about this silly storytelling game, and hopefully you give it a try.